Is the new Arizona Cardinal A.J. Green a fantasy sleeper or fool's gold for 2021? How likely is Saquon Barkley to bust coming off a massive knee injury? And join us for the kickoff of Season 10 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour with episode number 500 tonight. Plus, the Three-Peat winner in the FFPC 500 Dynasty League number 37 and the back-to-back winner in 750 Dynasty League number 2, Josh Batzner, drops in to discuss the Lions backfield, the Packers rushing attack, how they've changed, Corey Davis in New York, and much more. We've got a great show for you. Farrell Elliott is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour starts now.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com, with your hosts Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here's Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott.
So much, Rob, and thank you, Quiet Hollers. Remember to check out all the Quiet Hollers music at quiethollers.com. Greetings and salutations to all the Balkaholics and Farrelliacs. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Season 10 premiere of the HSFF Hour, as well as episode number 500 for the show. As always, presented by MyFFPC.com. I am, of course, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman, and my co-host is the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, Farrell Elliott. Farrell, I know you haven't been here for all 500 episodes, but man, it feels like you've been here for about 490 of them. So welcome aboard, and thanks for joining me again.
You're welcome, Balky. I've been there in spirit, and I've been a listener since episode 1. We go way, way back with this podcast. And, you know, you've continued, Balky. Very few people can accomplish anything 500 times. You've been such a great contributor to this. For all the fantasy football and for anyone that loves to play in the FFPC, our hats go off to one Eric Balkman.
Well, thank you, Farrell. I couldn't do it without you or the listeners that their energy keeps this going, you know, and the high-stakes players that have continued to agree to come onto the show, to spill their guts, to talk about how they've been able to achieve so much success in the fantasy football industry. Very difficult for people who are playing for big money to share their secrets, but I feel like we're able to bring that each and every week on this show, and that's all attributed to the FFPC players. Kudos to you, and kudos again to you players. As a reminder to the players out there, the 2021 Football Guys Players Championship registration is live. Remember, $500,000 for first place. You come in second, you still get $100K. And the early bird is live right now. So register by June 30th, draft by July 15th. You'll get a free FFPC $35 team credit. Best ball drafts obviously open, including the Cinco de Best Ball that start at $5 at myffpc.com. And for all you Dynasty fiends, we got a great Dynasty guest coming up tonight. Dynasty Orphans are available. I think we have some still as low as $1, so you can pick up a Dynasty Orphan very, very inexpensively. And, of course, Dynasty startups available, myffpc.com/dynasty. A world of stuff has happened since we broadcast last. We're going to try to cover all of it on the show tonight. I want to thank Football Guys, Draft Sharks, Roto World, and Rob for tonight's Fantasy Flash. Start off in our nation's capital, Farrell. Adam Schefter tweeted this out. That was Washington has signed Curtis Samuel, used to be with Carolina, to a 3-year, $34.5 million contract. It's nearly $25 million guaranteed. This was something that was rumored for a while, and it seems like Washington continues to poach a ton of players off Carolina. Now, Curtis Samuel has primarily been a slot receiver, obviously gets a lot of yards after the catch, but you got to believe that this is going to take some coverage pressure off Terry McLaurin, who didn't have a whole lot of help last year, either from the quarterback position or from the receiver opposite from him. These guys were actually teammates at The Ohio State University, where Samuel and McLaurin, and now they're going to get to compete again together on the Washington football team. Scott Turner's the new offensive coordinator there. He's shown pretty good the last few years, and you got to believe with Fitzmagic as the quarterback there, willing to take chances down the field, willing to pump the ball into tight spots. This is good news for McLaurin. This is good news for Samuel. So you look at how this is going to affect the Samuel signing. Let's stay away from Fitzpatrick for the moment, Farrell. But do you like McLaurin more now that Samuel's on the team? And is this a better spot for Samuel in Washington than he had in Carolina last year?
Yes, I do like McLaurin more, and it's hard for me to like McLaurin more because I've got him just about as high as anyone would want to take him in the early third round. Curtis Samuel is a player, Balky, that when he came in the league, I too thought the slot guy, the gadget guy, the guy with yards after the. But if you look at it, he's the most improved player every year in the NFL. Each year, 15 to 20 additional catches over the previous year. This past year, over 70. Rushed for 200 yards and a good sample size, 40 carries. Yeah, I really like what's going to happen here. I think that you can elevate all of the Redskin players based on what's happening there. You've got Riverboat Ron, you've got Fitzmagic. This will make a different running back out of J.D. McKissick. He won't get 80 balls again in this scenario. Highly unlikely, but even McKissick will have more yards and better opportunities to do things with the ball. This is a fascinating addition, and go with what you know. Curtis Samuel rewarded very well in this contract. He's going to a place where he's desired, loved, and we'll see that on the field. I'm in a draft where he went in the 11th round, and that's a steal for this player, a real steal.
Yeah, no, that's real good value for Curtis Samuel there, no question. Keeping it on the receiver tip here, we have one guy going from essentially the Midwest to out West, and that is A.J. Green, the longtime Cincinnati Bengal, is now an Arizona Cardinal. It's a 1-year, $8 million deal. A.J. Green turns 33 years old this coming July. Didn't have a great season last year in Cincinnati. He had 104 targets, only caught 47, just over 500 yards and only 2 touchdowns. Cliff Kingsbury, we know, coming from his collegiate experience, loves to spread out the receivers. And now they're going to have Kirk and Fitzgerald and Green and Hopkins, but Hopkins is going to be the guy there. You got to believe that the Arizona, we saw what they did. They got Rodney Hudson, obviously J.J. Watt as well. Seems like they're surrounding Kyler Murray on his rookie contract with a lot of difference makers trying to make a run at it this year. Farrell, I mean, I am not terribly excited about drafting A.J. Green, even as a Cardinal, now going to seemingly a better offense. But, you know, you don't have to pay a lot for him. 24th round, wide receiver 79. This is over the last 5 days, according to Darren Armani at FantasyMojo.com. You got to believe that's going to go up a little bit, but I don't know. I'm just not seeing much upside, even taking him that late.
I don't understand the play here by the Arizona Cardinals, and we're not. I don't know about you, Balky, but I think I made my statement that I'm not a big fan of the coach here. It looks like with all this wide receiver talent that was available, not only in free agency, but actually that was released and available before free agency started, you're in a situation where you look at all that wide receiver talent and you choose the one that can no longer really run. And he does not mix well with what you're trying to accomplish with this quarterback. This player runs quick, exact routes, so to be the number 1 or number 2 option in the passing game doesn't make sense. 24th round in a best ball, just for old time's sakes, throwing out there to A.J. Green. He's going to have a couple of good games during the year, but this is questionable for fantasy. It's questionable for the Cardinals, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Speaking of waiting and seeing, we did see another, and I didn't put this on the rundown, but a couple of things. We don't have to talk about necessarily the Allen Robinson thing, but he signed his franchise tender. We'll have to see if the Bears keep him or if they do indeed trade him. But Will Fuller signed a 1-year deal with the Miami Dolphins, which is kind of interesting. We believe Tagovailoa is going to be the quarterback there. We believe Devontae Parker is going to be on the team, but we don't know how Will Fuller fits into that. Farrell, when you look at where Will Fuller was going in the FFPC best ball leagues, again, over the last 5 days as a free agent, he was going in the mid-8th round as wide receiver 34. Look into the Farrell Elliott crystal ball. How high does that ADP go now that we know what team he's going to be playing for?
I think it stays about the same, quarterback dependent. It maybe should take an uptick, but you get into. You said he's an 8th round. You mojo him at about the 8th round there.
Yeah, correct.
So when you go into the 7th, you're now looking like against guys like Cortland Sutton and that type of group. Fuller is a make it happen wide receiver, but this is a different situation for him. Now I can understand why the Dolphins would really want this player, but I'm not so sure that. I think the people drafting Fuller in the 8th round saw much better landing spots than the Miami Dolphins for him.
Moving on here, Farrell, to talk about the tight end situation in Seattle and how it's affecting the tight end situation in Los Angeles. Gerald Everett is heading north to Seattle, formerly of the Rams. He signs a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Seahawks, according to Ian Rappaport on Twitter. Everett gets the prove-it deal instead of a 3 or 4 year pact, and it's kind of weird because he showed off pretty good. Then he got hurt, and then he had a couple of good games, and then he kind of disappeared for a while. Everett is going to be competing with some non-sexy tight ends on the roster, but tight ends that already have some chemistry established with Russell Wilson. He's 27 years old, former second-round pick, has a career average of 6.7 yards per target. I'm a little bit bullish on him, given I think he will end up being the starter there. I think he's going to get the lion's share of the tight end snaps. Tight end 25 in the 14th round in FFPC, again, tight end premium format. Do you like Gerald Everett now in his new landing spot now that he won't have to deal with Higbee anymore?
Well, I love Gerald Everett, and I always have. And his boy genius there in the Rams that did not know how to utilize this player. This player comes out of college. He snaps the ball when he catches it. He's got great body control. You can see it. He delivered the victory 2 years ago in that classic game, 54-51 over Kansas City, when he caught 2 touchdowns. That should have been his coming out party. What happens this year when they go into the playoffs? He gets 2 targets, 1 per game. This is an underused player. This is the player you throw the ball to when it's 3rd and 6, not turn around and hand it to Cam Akers. This is what this player has suffered from. He's been involved in an offense that should feature the tight end more, doesn't feature the tight end. He's an excellent guy, just like the 2 guys that just landed in New Orleans or in New England, Hunter Henry and Smith. Both those players are move tight ends, can line up in the slot. This player gets with Russell Wilson in Seattle. It's going to be a beautiful option for Russell Wilson. Everett's numbers should explode. He's going to catch a lot of passes. We're coming off a team where Tyler Lockett got 100 balls last year. There's so much need for this player in offenses around the league. He's got the perfect place, and guess what? He gets to play the Rams twice next year. How sweet will that be?
It definitely will be, especially for anybody who's managing him in fantasy too. Gerald Everett now going to Seattle, certainly well within the conversation of solid backup tight end in the FFPC. Keeping it on the tight end conversation, our good friend Hudson Kern-Reeve in the chat room just pointed out that Donald Parham is cooked in Los Angeles. As Jared Cook signs the deal with the Los Angeles Chargers, he is indeed the Hunter Henry replacement out there, going to be catching passes from Justin Herbert. He goes from New Orleans to Los Angeles, Farrell. What does that do to his fantasy value? And I'll tell you right now, again, this is over the last 5 days when he was a free agent, but he was going as tight end 32 in the 21st round.
Oh, it kicks him up through the roof. You've got to be impressed with that. It also lets them take another player. I expect them to draft a tight end as well. There's great tight end draft depth coming up, good talent that you can get third, fourth, fifth round. The complete tight end story with the Chargers isn't told yet. Parham will have a place. He's too big and too much of a target not to. But Cooks could have the kind of year that people always envisioned him to have. It's a good landing spot for him.
One other thing I want to get to here. By the way, we have Josh Batzner, the three-peat winner of the 500 number 37 Dynasty League in the FFPC, and the back-to-back winner of the 750 number 2 coming up in just 1 minute. I do want to talk about the Broncos backfield here briefly, Farrell, because Denver signed Mike Boone from the Vikings. It's a 2-year, $2.6 million contract. He gets a $1.6 million signing bonus, and then right after that, they rescinded their tender on Phillip Lindsay, which made him a free agent. Now, I'm not all that surprised that they went a different direction other than Lindsay. It didn't seem like they used him a whole lot last year in the backfield, and it didn't really seem like he had a place on the team. Now, rightly or wrongly, that was his future in Denver. So now he's going to go somewhere else. We'll talk about him more when we find his landing spot, but I do want to talk about the Mike Boone signing as it relates to Melvin Gordon. Does this make you like Melvin Gordon a little bit more than now knowing that it is Boone backing him up rather than a former Pro Bowler and Phillip Lindsay? Or does this really not affect Melvin Gordon in your mind at all, knowing if you do want to handcuff him, that it's going to be Boone rather than Lindsay?
I have been pushing Gordon up in my drafts anyway. And so, yes, I think this is to have Lindsay, because you have to have, when you have a talent like that on the roster, just for chemistry in the locker room and in the meeting rooms, you've got to get him some touches. So yes, I love what this does for the number one running back. I don't believe we're through at running back here in Denver. Look for Denver to bring in an interesting pass catching back and into through the draft, and maybe someone to take some touches in this backfield. Boone's a good player. You know, he's a University of Cincinnati player right up the road here from Louisville. He made the league as an undrafted player, and he's earned a place in the league. He's going to continue to play in the league for a while. The Denver GM, George Payton, the new GM there, had him at Minnesota all these years. He's a hardworking special teams player, but he is not a fantasy contributor. Don't bother to draft this player as a handcuff, and by the time we get after the draft and into drafting in August, that will come clearly obvious. But yeah, Boone's a good player, and when they give him the ball, he runs hard. You got to give him credit. He doesn't get a lot of opportunities, but you know, he's good fun to watch.
Rarely do we get a chance to break news on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, but Will Fuller obviously moving from Houston to Miami. How did the Texans answer that? Well, they've signed Dante Moncrief and Alex Erickson to take his place. Just coming across Twitter within the last few minutes. My heart bleeds for you, Texans fans. With the Watson situation, Fuller in Miami, Watt in Arizona, and you got Alex Erickson, a former Badger, by the way, coming in along with, as Danny Mueller always says, Monte Doncrief, joining him on the Texans this year. Joining us on the show tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is a player I'm very excited to have on the program for several reasons, of which I'm about to get to. He's been playing football for more than 3 decades. Within the last 3 years, he's shifted from redraft to Dynasty League specifically, and says he seems to have found his area of strength. The proof is indeed in the pudding. He's got multiple high-stakes Dynasty titles under his belt already. He is the 750 Dynasty League number 2 back-to-back winner and the Three-Peat winner of the 500 number 37 League. Please welcome the pride of Plymouth, Wisconsin, onto the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. It is indeed Josh Batzner. Josh, thanks for coming on board this Thursday with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's always, I wanted to get a heavy hitter for episode number 500, and I look at the boxes you check here. A three-peat winner in the FFPC Dynasty League number 37 at the 500 level, a back-to-back winner of 750 number 2, and you're from Wisconsin, a man after my own heart, basically a neighbor of mine, Farrell. So this is great to have you on tonight, Josh. So awesome to get to pick to your brain. We're going to get into plenty of Dynasty talk. Before we get into the fantasy football portion of tonight's conversation with you, can you tell I already know what you do, but can you tell the listeners what you're doing for a living in Plymouth?
Yeah, I'm a 5th grade teacher at Riverview Middle School. I teach math and science. So, yeah. So fantasy football is my way to relax and kind of, decompress. So yeah.
And
I
the other
love
thing
that.
Farrell, and this is the point I want to bring up right away. Josh is a very analytical numbers guy, and I think, while that's sort of a polarizing take on fantasy football is to be a numbers guy, I don't think you can argue with the results. Clearly the analytics are making sense for Josh as he's got just these 5 dynasty titles alone in these 2 leagues. It's been crazy so far, and now hopefully you and I will have to try to at least fake being smart enough to try to understand what Josh is talking about tonight.
I can't do that, Balky. But, the quants will inherit the earth. Everybody knows that. But so do the 5th graders, do they know that you're a fantasy football guru?
Yeah. I talk a little bit about the players with some of the kids in class, and we kind of go back and forth. And I got some, Justin Herbert fans, and I've got a couple Bears fans in my classroom too. So they're not taking the Andy Dalton news too highly, but it's fun. So they have their teams, and I don't think they quite know that I do some of the higher levels, but yeah, they know that I'm pretty apt. So
they know everything about you. They've researched this online. Are you kidding me? If you were my 5th grade teacher, I would have stalked you. I would have never gone home. We would have talked football absolutely every minute. It's just this is. Yeah, you've still yet to meet your future Farrell Elliott 5th grader, but he's coming. And he's coming.
Yeah, we got a few in there that love talking nothing but football. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. No.
Oh man, so you're a 3-peat going for a 4-peat. I considered myself successful when I made it to Las Vegas 3 times just to draft. You've won 3 in a row. What's your secret? How are you preparing to go for 4? And once you're in a dynasty, once you win 4, that's the dynasty of a dynasty. How much better can it get, Josh?
Well, each year, you want to keep improving your team. And this year I made a little bit of a concerted effort to kind of get my team a little bit younger. And I don't know if you can see the team in front of you, but like for my 537 team, I've chopped off some of the higher age guys, and I've gone a little bit younger, getting Justin Jefferson, and my backs getting Akers and Swift, and, just kind of getting ready to reboot. So, 3's nice, but 4, 5, 6, you gotta have a 3-year window. So, so I was doing a little bit of that, and then a year after I started this one, I picked up an orphan and took 2nd in that one, and then I won the last 2 years in that one, and then I was up for another challenge. So I got a new team last year, and I took 2nd. So it kind of seems my first year I take 2nd as I kind of get my roster shaped up, and by year 2 I've got it pretty much where I want it. And it's not a guarantee to, win it at the very end, but, you can get yourself to that number 1 seed. And then that gets you in a good position, because you never know what's going to happen in the last couple of weeks. You can have some bizarre games that can skew some things, but getting the roster pretty nice. So.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because you think about it's one of these things like, okay, I'll use the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as an example. And granted, now this isn't going to be perfect, but everybody's talking about the Buccaneers, they won the Super Bowl last year. They're bringing everybody back this year. They're going to make a run at it again. Well, yeah, sometimes that can work, but sometimes it's not about bringing the players that helped you in 2020 back for 2021. It's about finding the players on other teams, on other squads, that are going to help you in 2021. It's not necessarily, just because somebody had a great 2020 doesn't necessarily mean that they have a really good chance of having a great 2021. And I think that's sometimes the danger we have as dynasty owners, especially if we're coming off a first place, finish, a runner-up finish. We just assume we're this close, or we can run it back with this squad. That's not always the case. It's all about foreseeing the future. And Josh, certainly you've done a good job with that by winning these 5 dynasty titles here in the last 3 years. Let's talk a little bit about some player analysis here. Marvin Jones signs with the Jacksonville Jaguars in free agency. So now he heads to this team that will presumptively have Trevor Lawrence at quarterback there. Obviously, Laviska Shenault was picked there high last year. DJ Chark, I know you own him in some of your dynasty leagues. What does this do for Chark's fantasy value, knowing that Marvin Jones, a field flipper, and a guy who caught a lot of touchdowns in Cincinnati and Detroit, what does this do for you having Chark on your rosters?
Well, I've got Chark on 2 out of my 3 teams, and he's been a little bit slow to develop. I was kind of hoping for a little bit quicker progression with him, but I think the Marvin Jones signing helps him. A nice veteran receiver in there. You've got, like you said, Laviska in there, and hopefully, I mean, right now DJ's a hold for me because I'm really hoping they're going to take Lawrence, and then, you know, if Lawrence goes in there, I think that could be a really nice connection right there. So a lot's going to determine if Jacksonville somehow screws up the draft and doesn't get Lawrence and we're stuck with Minshew, or if they pick up someone else in free agency that's not really worth much, then I might look on moving on with them. But for right now, it's a hold.
How much of the redraft do you play?
Well, that's what I used to just all do. Even back 3 decades ago when I used to got invited into my brother's league, and we used to do that. And so I did 30 years of that, or, you know, good 25 years of that. And I was always left with that frustration at the end of the year. Something quirky would happen at the end and I'd get knocked out because I built this team so nicely by the end of the year, and then I had to start all over again. So I'm not exactly sure how I jumped into Dynasty, but once I went in there, I'm like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So, and now it's just like perfect. That. So, yeah, redraft is great because you get a fresh start, you know, and some players like that. You completely wipe the slate clean and start fresh. But I'm pretty happy with how I build teams and, you know, the results. I don't know if I'll get bored with this and want to switch. A lot of the fellow teammates that ask if I want to co-manage another team, they're like, oh, you should try out Superflex and things like that. So I might dabble in some others, but I really enjoy Dynasty. 1 quarterback right now, tight end premium.
The FFPC will certainly invite you to dabble. I have been I've been jumping into these various formats of classic and best ball, and I'm loving it. But the FFPC randomizer sends me immediately to the last seat in the row and coach. I mean, I am back of the bus. If you've ever watched The Graduate, I'm sitting back there waiting for Kate Ross and Dustin Hoffman to appear. I'm in the very, very back. But if I ever get to the front, and I'm sitting at 2, 3, 4, I am a little nervous about pulling the trigger on Saquon Barkley. And I know in Dynasty he matches the great opportunity of being a bell cow running back and being young. But coming on after this knee injury, if I were sitting in a startup Dynasty and I'm sitting there early in the draft, would you have any trouble pulling the trigger on Barkley? Because I don't know if I want to live with him 1 year. Are you going to try to live with him for his career? Well, and that's a good point. But if you look at a lot of the top backs that are there, they all got question marks right now. And some injuries, like you got McCaffrey up there. Jonathan Taylor was someone who I was kind of focusing and looking at, but now they just re-signed Marlon Mack, so that puts a little twist in that. And then you go down, you've got Kamara, who's, 25 and a new quarterback. You don't know how that's going to shake out. You got Cook, who's 25 and injury issues. You've got Chubb, who's sharing the backfield. So there's not a lot up there without question marks. So when in doubt, and, maybe we'll talk about this later. I mean, you look at the age. He's still 24. He didn't have a lot of wear and tear with the injuries, if you want to look at it that. So I'm hoping for 2-3 solid years out of him. But we'll see with they just signed Booker, and we'll have to see. I think they could use a wide receiver 1 to kind of help out, take some of the pressure off
to spread it around. They got
Good
Shepard and Slayton and stuff, and they just signed Kyle Rudolph, which kind of messes up my Ingram. But yeah, I'm not too worried about Barkley. In fact, I kind of bought him a little bit low. He was one of the guys I kind of switched out of. I got out of Kamara while he was at his high point, and took a little chance and got Barkley plus, extra. So those are the types of things I look for. So, no, I mean, out of all the running backs, he's as good of a bet, I think, as the others. So
good. Okay. Well, now if I ever get up in front of the draft, I can keep that as part of my consideration. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Talking with Josh Batzner, the three-peat winner of 500, number 37 and 750, number 2 back-to-back champ, here on episode 500 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. We had a question from the chat room. The smartest neurobiologist I know over at Cornell, Hudson Reeve, wants to know about the late signing the Raiders made today. Kenyon Drake from the Cardinals is now going to be a Las Vegas Raider. So, Josh, question for you. I guess we could talk about it from 2021 aspect as well as what it's going to be like going forward there. What does it do for Josh Jacobs? How do you see the backfield shaking out? And as a second part to that question, you think Chase Edmonds is going to be the guy in Arizona, or they're going to add somebody in the draft?
Yeah, with Josh Jacobs, I actually have him on all through my teams, and that was one of the things I did in the offseason. I did not see them adding Devontae Booker, but I didn't see them getting rid of their whole offensive line pretty much too. So there's been a lot of shake-up this free agency, and I keep checking it like every 15, 20 minutes because something else comes out. But, yeah, there's some definite question marks, I think, about Jacobs. He had a limited catching role. We know he can catch, but now with Booker in there, Booker is a little bit older. He's 28 and up there, but or not Booker.
Drake.
Who did the Raiders? Yeah. So, I think it does take some of the upside off of Jacobs. He was probably a back-end RB1, and now I think that puts him, probably middle of RB2 land. So we'll have to see how that shakes out in that backfield.
I just before we get to the next part, I'm just looking at this right now. And again, I'm doing FFPC best ball redraft ADP here on this. This is not startup ADP or anything like that. Since the signing just happened, it's not going to be very reliable. But Josh Jacobs was going at that 2-3 turn as running back 15. Kenyon Drake obviously was going later than that. When you look at his ADP, as far as where it was at, again before he signed with the Raiders this afternoon. We'll see how this fleshes out over the next few days. But he was running back 29 at 7-11. And Chase Edmonds, as long as we're talking about the Cardinals, Chase Edmonds was actually going much later than that as I try to find him here, running back 32 at the 8-10. So he was not going that much later than Kenyon Drake, but he certainly has the command of the backfield there going forward, maybe until the draft. And if Arizona soaks a day 1 or day 2 pick into a running back, they are going to be highly sought after in both Dynasty and redraft formats. Josh, you have Cortland. So you talked about Josh Jacobs in all 3 leagues. You have Cortland Sutton in all 3 of your Dynasty leagues in the FFPC as well. This is another guy coming off a torn ligament in his knee. How confident are you in a bounce back this season? Have you been shopping him at all to see what you could get, or are you going to see what's going to happen first before you think about moving him?
Well, like you said, I got him all over the place, and that injury last year, that really that hurt a little bit. He was starting to kind of come into his own, and everything seems like he's on track to come back healthy. He has Jerry Jeudy on the other side. Noah Fant, you talked a little bit earlier in the show about Melvin Gordon. So the weapons are there to kind of spread it around. Big question is Drew Lock. Is he going to be the quarterback for Denver, or are they going to find someone? Personally, I don't think Lock is the answer. So Cortland right now, until he can show that he's healthy and maybe gets out to a good start where his value might go up a little bit, I'm going to be holding on to him. But right now, Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, I have about the same. I have them real close in value. And really the only difference, I like Sutton more this year, but Jerry Jeudy being 3 years younger gives you a little bit more time, and I don't think there's a better route runner than Jeudy, but Sutton is the bigger, more physical receiver. So it's going to depend on the quarterback that they get throwing the balls, on which one's going to be getting the most targets, I think.
I'm so glad to hear you say that about being a route runner, Jerry Jeudy. I told someone the other day that Jerry Jeudy was Fred Biletnikoff with speed, and they asked me who Fred Biletnikoff was. No one. I know it's just it's I won't be talking to that person for a while. No one has to ask who Jamal Williams is. I look forward in the future to having Balky hang out at the Senior Bowl sometime and meet these players when they're coming out of school. But Jamal was just an elusive, explosive personality, and people just fell for him immediately. And he's the kind of player that you want to root for. And now I think he is in a situation to really pay dividends. I think he's an excellent pairing with the quarterback in this passing game. But the player that you had mentioned early, Deandre Swift, can you foresee sort of a Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara situation developing in Detroit? Are you high on these players? How does Williams affect your thoughts of Swift?
I like that comparison with Ingram and Kamara. I hadn't thought about it like that, but being a Packer fan, being from Wisconsin, having seen Jamal Williams and his personality, yeah, you're right. I was really thinking it was going to be A.J. Dillon and they were going to sign Williams back in Green Bay and let Jones go. So when they signed Jones, kind of saw the writing on the wall. So Detroit's got themselves a great back. And Jamal Williams, I don't think is going to be any more than what he was with the Packers, fantasy-wise. Real football-wise, it's a great signing. But the thing is, Jamal Williams, he picks up the pass rush really well. He's a good catcher. So as long as Peterson and Kerryon Johnson and none of those guys come back, he'll be sitting at the number 2. He could be poaching those goal line rushes, and he's going to be getting fair share of passing attempts too. So I think it does kind of knock down Deandre Swift a little bit, but I mean, Swift is only 22 as well, so he's got a lot of years in front of him, and we'll see how Williams holds up too. But it's a great football signing, not the greatest for value-wise, I think, for Swift, but Williams is still going to be Williams, the same type of fantasy output, I would think.
Let's talk about shift over to the wide receiver position. Corey Davis was a guy who broke up very late in his career, Josh, a guy that many Dynasty players had sort of given up for nothing, cut in a lot of leagues. And this is a guy who was picked in the top 5 of the NFL draft. He broke out last year with Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. Now he will be going to the New York Jets, presumably as their number 1 receiver ahead of Denzel Mims. We'll see if the Jets sign another receiver that could be their number 1 there, and Smith-Schuster. I don't know if that's going to happen. But what we know right now is Davis is there. What does that do for his dynasty stock, in your opinion, as the Jets stand right now?
Well, I think it's a good fit right now. Even with Sam Darnold, I'm expecting them probably to pivot and once draft day comes around, send Darnold away. So it's going to depend who they bring in. And, of course, you mentioned, Eric, if Juju comes over there, that's obviously going to take some targets away and things like that. But right now I think Corey Davis and Denzel Mims is a really fine 1-2 punch. They got to figure out what they want to do with if they're going to go with Herndon at tight end. But Crowder's there. He's got a non-guaranteed $10 million contract, so he's a pretty easy cut to clear some space. I think they just picked up a wide receiver 3 type in the last 30 minutes right before I started listening to you guys. I saw something, but it was minimal, but it made me think that Crowder might be on his way out. So Davis and Mims, I think it's a pretty good 1-2 punch right there, because Davis, he didn't have that much confidence. It seemed like he got it back a little bit. He's going to get some tougher corners on him because he doesn't have A.J. Brown to take some of that attention away from him. But, you know, I would definitely hold on to him, or if you can buy him cheap, I think he's a decent buy cheap option, because if you get the right quarterback in there, I think he can be putting up 70, 75 catches, 1,000 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns maybe. So a good wide receiver 3-4 type output.
I cringed a little bit, Balky, when I saw Corey Davis. When I saw Corey Davis go to the Jets, but I've warmed up a little bit. I've warmed up a little bit to it. Have you?
I don't know. Like, it's weird because, well, I've told my Corey Davis story on the show. I owned him in one Dynasty league, and I got him as a quasi throw-in to a trade. And when it came down, this is a Kentucky, a KFFSC, a Dynasty league, and when it came down to it, he just, like, I had some other guys that were just trash, and I'm like, I'll keep Corey Davis, see what happens. Same thing happened with Robbie Anderson last year, where I was ready to cut both those guys, and then they both had pretty good seasons. So I don't know. Like, whatever happens with them, but I don't really have high expectations. By the way, Josh, the receiver you were talking about, Jaguars, former Jaguars receiver Keelan Cole signed a $5.5 million with the Jets. So he is going to be a New York Jet catching passes, you would think, from Sam Darnold there. We'll see. So much is going to happen before the season starts. We have more free agency. We have the draft to get to. And I guess the question really, Farrell, for Josh here is, like, and for you and I as Dynasty players, when's the right time to trade?
It's interesting. It appears that a lot of things are going to happen, and they're all happening while we're doing the show, which I appreciate that. And Balky, your moves in the KFFSC Dynasty are, once again prove your genius, although perhaps you describe it as accidental genius. This, as the 500th show, Josh, you being here has been a great gift for me, because our celebrated and prominent chat room star, good friend, FFPC, KFFSC player, the aforementioned Hudson Kern-Reeve, has his Dynasty crew, which they refer to themselves as the 26ers, they have expanded into another startup dynasty. And apparently someone said later, guys, and I got an invite. And I was
nice.
So thrilled to be in. This is my years of playing fantasy football. This is my very, very first Dynasty team. So I get the invite, and I don't even know what my draft pick is. And it shows that it's now full. Apparently somebody set it up and pushed a button, and the next thing I know, my inbox is full of guys trying to trade draft positions and trading the next. And I'm going, what the hell is going on with my phone? What is this? I get all these emails and offers are made, and then they're canceled, and I haven't even looked at them. And it's just it's already off to a feverish start, and nobody even has a player yet. So learning from you, this has been great. And how you've talked about moving from players. Do you wheel and deal during free agency, during trading? How does it shake out at first? How does it, should I ignore this and just use my player knowledge to assemble my best team, or should I fall victim to some of these trade offers from these outstanding fantasy vets of Dynasty lore here?
Well, I would think they, in all the trade offers, they have your best interest at heart. So I'm sure they're all in your favor. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. But one of the things I learned, too, when I got in my first league for Dynasty is you start to get used to the guys. You get to know them, chat, especially during the draft, and you find out a little bit more. I mean, the guys that I'm with are just great, but you learn a lot about them, the players that they like, where they're from, the things that they tend to do, and what they like in trades and what they don't. So it takes a little bit, and I would say a year or so, and then you have a pretty good feel. But I trade all the time. There's not an off season for my teams. I literally, there's no way anyone puts more trade offers out than I do in my leagues. I'm constantly looking for something based on what other teams need, what things I can get. And usually I'm thinking about 2 or 3 moves down. If I get this player, then I'm pretty sure this team's going to want them, and I can move them for player X. So it's a little bit of chess, in it, because you're thinking a couple moves ahead. But yeah, I'm constantly throwing trades out there, and that's based on my likes too. But I listen to your show and other shows, and I've got some trade calculators that I really like that kind of just reinforce some of my thoughts before I send anything out there. But in a Dynasty league, it just takes a little time to kind of get your feet and understand where the other players are coming from. And that way, you're sending decent trades, something that can help them out. But, I'm always hoping to win every trade, at least by a little bit, because if you win enough of those, that allows you to kind of splurge on someone and maybe, not win the trade, but really get a player that you want. So,
yeah, that's the old Houston Rockets GM, well, now president of basketball operations for the Sixers, Daryl Morey. He always did that, where he'd do 1 million trades, and he would win each of them by like 1 or 2%, and all of a sudden he had a great team, after
Yep.
all these trades, and sometimes you can apply that to Dynasty as well, for sure. Let's get to a couple of emails here, Josh, as long as we got a little bit of extra time on the show this evening. I know we touched on Aaron Jones briefly earlier, but let's get into some heavy-duty Packers backfield talk here. This is from Phil in Albany, New York. Hi, Josh. Given how the Packers never really like to overuse Aaron Jones, do you see the backfield for Green Bay being a 50-50 split between him and A.J. Dillon this season? Thanks so much. That is Phil in Albany, New York. Josh, what do you think? How does this backfield shake? First of all, is it Jones and Dillon? Does another running back enter the fray via the draft, or maybe a free agent pickup to pick, make this a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? How do you see the Packers backfield for 2021 for fantasy purposes?
Well, yeah, Jones always was, maybe about 14 carries or at most. So you didn't see a lot of the 20 carry type games. He doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires. He's in pretty good shape. He's had a few nagging injuries. So, he's going to be healthy. And I think for the next 2 years, he's going to be an RB1, no doubt about it. Yeah. A.J. Dillon is not going to fill the Jamal Williams role as effectively. He's not as good a pass protector. So I think you're going to see Jones move around a lot more. So I see an uptick with catches and rushing yards. You might see some regression with touchdowns because that's just kind of unsustainable some of the years that he's had. But I think he's going to get an uptick in targets and in carries. And really the contract's kind of front-loaded for the first 2 years. So I would see Jones being a Packer for 2 years. They're going to probably let him go, and then I think they'll have A.J. Dillon for his last year of his rookie contract. So I think that's kind of how the next 3 years play out for the Packers, which I'm excited about, being a Packer fan.
Sure.
He touches the ball, he can get to the end zone every time he touches it. So he's an exciting toy for Rodgers to have on offense.
5.2 yards a carry, career average for Aaron Jones, too. That's been pretty impressive. We'll see if he can keep that up going forward. Josh, you've been extremely gracious with your time tonight. Certainly appreciate it. Before we let you go, Farrell's going to ask you one final question.
Sure. Yeah, it's an important question that Farrell demands to ask, because I want to know 1 or 2 players that you want to acquire in Dynasty leagues right now, preferably through the draft, because that's how I'll be acquiring them. And then, is there someone that you're just looking to get away from? Somebody that obviously would be quite a pick in redraft, but somebody for Dynasty that you just don't really care for?
Yeah, let's see. Players that I'm trying to target right now, and I've already gotten a few shares of him. Michael Pittman, I think he is going to be really nice with having Wentz there, having some other weapons, good running, hopefully having the lead. I just think Pittman's going to be a nice fixture at wide receiver for Indy. Plus, he's super young, 23. And sticking with wide receivers, I love T. Higgins. I think people are high on him, but I don't think they realize what his ceiling's going to be. And I would think he is really going to show it next year. A lot of love for CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, and rightly so. But I think T. Higgins is going to be right up there, if not the top, by the end of this year out of that group of receivers. And as far as selling, go ahead.
Yes, please. No, please. I was looking for the answer. Go ahead.
Oh, and as far as selling, I've already done it. I've sold all my Kamara shares. I had him. Yeah, I had him in all three of my teams, and he has served me well. But the price you got to pay for him right now, I would rather go with someone younger. He's 25. If Winston's the quarterback, they're going to bring in Hill on the goal line, and that's going to poach some touchdowns for him. And I just don't think it's sustainable. And what you have to pay for him right now, I would rather go to a younger guy, whether it's Jonathan Taylor, even probably Barkley or Cook right now. So Cook would be probably the third out of that choice. But, so he's probably someone I'm looking to sell because right now his value is so high. You can get a lot for him.
I lied. I'm going to ask you one final question here. Sure. You mentioned Kamara's age, Josh. I'm kind of curious, when you look at these upper echelon running backs in the NFL, the McCaffreys, the Barkleys, the Kamaras of the world, is there a certain age that they get to? If they're like Kamara's a good example, where he just absolutely crushed it last year. Knowing what we know now, he would have been the 101 last year. Is there a point where an age that they get to where you're like, okay, this is when his value's highest, I'm going to try to move him right now? Is it 25? Is it earlier? Is it later?
I would say 25 is the age where I want to move on from my running back. So, I do. I have Cook as well, and I have Kamara, and I'm looking, at possibly moving one or both of them to get a little bit younger. I think you have to keep your eye on ages, and especially with running backs when you have a much smaller window. With wide receivers, you can have a good 7 to 9 year window of high productivity, but with running backs, you're probably only going to get 2 to 5 depending on injuries and who they bring in that's younger, and you have to keep an eye on that. And especially with the rookie draft, too. I mean, everyone loves Najee Harris, but he's 23. You look at Cam Akers. Cam Akers is 21, and he's got a year under his belt. So if you can trade your 101 or 102, that someone really wants Najee Harris, and they'll give you Akers and maybe a little bit more. I mean, you're gaining some years right there, and it's really important with running backs, I feel. So
absolutely. The younger, the better. That is great analysis. Great analysis. I wish we had more time. We don't. I'm sure Josh will probably given his success, Farrell, I'm sure he'll make it his way back onto this show or another one of our shows here going forward for sure. Josh Batzner, ladies and gentlemen, our guest tonight, the three-peat winner of the FFPC Dynasty League number 37, the back-to-back winner of the FFPC 750 Dynasty League number 2. What a treat, man. This was awesome talking shop with you tonight. Fantastic that I got a fellow Packers fan and a fellow Wisconsinite on episode 500. Keep it real in Plymouth. We'll talk to you again real soon, dude. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
That's great.
Josh Batzner, ladies and gentlemen. Great stuff from him. Wow. A lot of Dynasty. Now, this is a great guest for you to sort of break you into Dynasty fantasy football, Farrell.
No kidding. I finally learned something. I have a new 5th grade teacher. This is more than I learned in the 5th grade the first time around. This is grand. This is just this is awesome.
Okay, so the running back thing, that I'll lead off with that because I think that's the most interesting thing. Two-parter. Number one, when to move on from these studs, because I think sometimes we get locked into these studs and and we hang on to him a year too long, and we regret not selling him, or trading him for assets the year prior. I did that with Gurley, where I felt like I held on to him a year too long. Turns out I got rid of him at the right time, and I got a really good deal, and it totally reshaped the Dynasty league I had him in. I got very lucky there. But 25, which is interesting because basically if running backs are coming in the league at age 21 or so, if they're a stud, after like 3 years, 4 years, it's time to say, hey, look, it's been real. I need to get younger here, and I'm going to give somebody else the option of getting – and he did it with Kamara. He put his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, and I think perhaps just incrementally the small things that take away from Kamara's productivity is what turns him against Kamara. You take a great player like that, but he's already looking at the quarterback and what the X factor quarterback is going to take away down there. Maybe even if he had just Jameis and could count on Jameis and think that Kamara gets the good reception piece of the 5,000 yards that Jameis would have the potential to throw for without Taysom Hill getting in the way. And I'll put all that together, and it makes sense. And, boy, there would be a lot of rabid buyers for Kamara. That's the whole benefit of having something to trade is everybody wants to line up and get something for it. So, makes good sense.
Yeah, and the thing is too is to not be married to the player. Like you gotta. Mm-hmm. He was motivated. He was ready to move on. He was he mentioned it, refreshing his rosters, getting younger every so often, and sometimes that's the key to dominance. And if you're looking to the key to dominance, why not talk to a guy who's three-peated at the highest level of fantasy football? No question. In Josh Batzner. All right, we got time for a couple of emails. I don't know if we'll get to a whole lot of them. Let's kick things off with, this is a great one for you, Farrell. Greg in Omaha. How likely is John Brown to be the best fantasy receiver in Las Vegas this year? Balky, just sit this one out and let Farrell answer, please. He writes, Happy St. Patrick's Day. That's Greg in Omaha. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. Farrell, it's John Brown. It's Henry Ruggs. It's Hunter Renfrow as of right now in Las Vegas. Obviously, Kenyon Drake joining the fold at the running back position. But who's the number one there? Is it going to be John Brown for fantasy purposes?
Don't forget the Edwards kid, and all these guys catch 45 passes in a losing effort. John Brown comes into this situation, and, Kamara had to leave because of how he got with the coaches and in the locker room at the end of the year. But they've let better players get away for less money, and they bring this player in who we've talked about on the show before, the player that we admire greatly. But he's at the very end of his career, slight of build, a little slow. No, it's this, unless you just force him the ball, and I don't see this working at all. We'll do one final email. I'm going to save. We got a Bills wide receiver question that I think will be good for next week, but I do want to get to this one because this was huge. Ted in St. Louis writes, Dear Balky and Farrell, how do you sort out the fantasy value for the newest New England tight ends this season, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith? So the Patriots seemingly have signed 70% of all eligible free agents in the NFL by my count, and two of them were tight ends. They gave Jonnu Smith the big deal, and then the next day, I think it was the second day of free agency, they give Hunter Henry a 3-year contract as well. So I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of this, Farrell, when you think about how, and I was talking with Dave the Dizzle Gerzak about this yesterday. I said, they drafted 2 tight ends with their first 2 picks of the draft last year. And Dave said, well, yeah, they realized they sucked and that now they have to move on to the new guys. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe I don't know. But Smith and Henry, how do you sort this out now in best ball tight end premium leagues like the FFPC? This didn't surprise me. This is a fascinating move, and I'm quickly becoming a Patriots fan. They did this, Scott Pioli, when he was involved in the office, they did this in the mid-2000s in the way that they built using free agency and doing it in a bargain way and doing it with these 1-year deals. And I can see this team coming together. So for a fantasy perspective, there's going to be guys that are going to be tempted to think back to to Gronkowski and Hernandez. And that's not what this is, because these guys are interchangeable. Henry actually lined up more in the slot for the Chargers than Smith did down at Tennessee, where it immediately becomes beneficial for the quarterback and for these two players is the TD receptions, because the Patriots got nothing from their tight ends in the red zone in this past season. And these guys are two big targets. They're going to cause and create chaos for all the defenses that are going to have to try to stop them, those very, very tough AFC East defenses. I think New England is going to be the most entertaining team to watch, and you should not shy away from either of these players. This is one of those situations where in the draft we're going to see them go back-to-back or in the same round. And if you could possibly stack them, maybe you should. This is, especially as Newton, we were curious about what's going to happen at quarterback there. But in Newton's case, with his shoulder, he had a hard time moving the ball down the field. That makes Jonnu Smith very important. He's going to catch the ball and run well after it. Your down the field tight end here is Henry. He's a great catcher down the field, and he gets the kind of separation against linebackers that is going to be necessary for Newton's accuracy. So these two players with the quarterback, or really with any other young quarterback that they would bring in there, it's a wonderful thing. And I wonder if what these guys bring to the offense, just what that does to Edelman, James White, maybe those guys aren't going to be there. If they are there, it'll be curious to see what their role is. These guys catch a lot of balls. I don't know which one catches the most. They catch touchdowns. They will be just as valuable to fantasy players as any individual tight end on a lot of teams.
We'll have more fresh ADP next week as we can kind of see how the high stakes players are tackling the tight end position, so to speak, especially when in regards to New England. Really, the New England team in general is. I'm with you, Farrell. They're going to be so. I don't know if fun is. I don't know if fun is the right word. Intriguing, interesting. I think are pretty appropriate there to see how this whole experiment turns out in 2021. It's always awesome to see when teams really take an aggressive approach to see how it turns out for them. It's always awesome to talk to you, my friend, each and every week here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. 500 episodes in the books. I thank you for your contribution. And I know first of all, everybody needs to get over to KFFSC.com. There's best balls, there's classics, there's tons of stuff going on there. Dynasty Startup. I'm going to have to join that Dynasty Startup. And then I need to get on another best ball as well, because my last one's done. I'm catching up from stuff with vacations. Now I think I'm ready to tackle another draft there for sure. Farrell, can't thank you enough for coming on. We'll all get over to KFFSC.com. Enjoy all the college basketball games this weekend, and we'll talk to you again next Thursday, actually.
See you, boys.
Farrell Elliott, ladies and gentlemen, the commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, joining us here every week as the co-host of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. And make sure you get over to KFFSC.com and register for some drafts there if you haven't already. Not only that, get over to myffpc.com and get in on some of the drafts we have going on there as well. Dynasty Startups, Dynasty Orphans, Best Balls, Slims, Best Balls, Best Ball de Cincos we got going on. And then, of course, that Football Guys early bird special. Make sure you're registering for your teams there so you can cash in on that $35 free team credit as well. That is going to do it for the Season 10 premiere and episode 500 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to Josh Batzner, the three-time Three-Peat champion of 500, number 37, and the back-to-back winner of 750, number 2. We've never had a Dynasty guest on like that. We've never had anybody come on these airwaves who's won not only 3 straight in one league, but back-to-back in another league and is the reigning defending champ in both. Great stuff from him, and he's from Wisconsin, the home of fantasy football. Farrell Elliott, my co-host, want to thank him, the FFPC, Rob Bryson, of course, each and every one of you. Now, we will be back again. It will be next Thursday at 10/9 Central. We will not have a show next Friday either. It will be Thursday, 10/9 Central, so make sure you're joining us a day early for that. Don't forget, the other thing, I always talk about this show. I always talk about the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, which we'll have a new episode of that coming up in a couple of weeks. But don't forget to check out the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship podcast as well. Farrell hosts that one, the sports guest of this show, and Kentucky player Bob Batzner. They do a great job there recapping the last draft. Always good analysis, guys, as well. 500 in the book. Season 10 is launched. Can't thank you guys enough. And now go enjoy some college basketball, everybody. Your March Madness weekend starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com. It was broadcast live and heard around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
I know in the past when we've had landmark shows, we've had a cavalcade of guests come on, and that's fun, and it's always good to reconnect with a lot of the former guests we've had on the show. I didn't want to do it for episode 500 because I feel like what we do on this show is to bring you fresh faces, fresh voices that don't get the exposure of a lot of pundits out there and a lot of fantasy football analysts, and they do all do a great job. But I always like the people that you don't hear from, and hopefully you guys really enjoyed the 40-minute conversation with Josh Batzner, and that's how we'll celebrate episode 500 tonight. Great Dynasty analysis from a player who is underexposed, a player that, you know, the public wouldn't hear from if it wasn't for this show. And you all listening are responsible for that. So keep listening, keep streaming, keep downloading, keep telling us, giving us feedback, keep reviewing us. We certainly appreciate that. And we'll always try to do better. 500 in, and hopefully 500 more coming, maybe even more. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks again.